The story is being created. How is it possible for a human to have so much power? A man who came from hell and loves the gym, athlete Hansol, is performing a deadlift with 10 tons for the first time in history. He prepares to lift that enormous weight, takes a deep breath, and plants his feet firmly on the ground. At the moment, everything is silent. It's just him and the weight. Hansol holds his breath and puts all his strength into lifting that weight off the ground. The pressure from his muscles is so great that it tears his clothes. A 17-year-old is pushing the limits of humanity. However, he feels a twinge, a sharp pain spreading through his body. The pain is so intense that it causes him to drop the weight in the middle of the movement as he falls backward. The people around are concerned, calling out his name. Hansol has a nosebleed. All the veins in his body are dilated. People try to call a doctor, but it's too late. They keep calling for Hansol, but he doesn't respond. In his head, he thinks he had a blackout, a normal thing in the gym world. This wouldn't have happened if he were more muscular, right? He hears a message: epic skill muscle growth has been created. He continues to think that most people and girls don't prefer muscular men, and another skill is created: muscle contraction. Being fashionable or having big muscles, to him, that's the biggest question in the universe, but he doesn't have time for that. He needs to eat protein. A unique skin created, Hawkeye LV1, and the passive calm. He notices a strange voice in his head as the message that he has achieved a legendary bodybuilder species appears. When he slowly opens his eyes, he is faced with several chickens watching him. His now small body is being pecked by the chickens. He wakes up frightened, scaring the chickens around him. He remembers he was doing a deadlift, while his passive skill calms him down. Looking ahead, he sees a prairie with mountains in the background, a river flowing, and several giant chickens around him. He becomes a little pensive, trying to figure out where he is, concluding that he may have died and ended up in the chicken hell because he ate a lot of chicken breast in his life. That must be why he's being attacked by several chickens. But there comes a moment when he loses patience and hits one on the head, crushing it in. He's already stressed because he hasn't eaten protein, but he notices the system notification. His Hawkeye ability is active on the chickens, allowing him to discover the amount of protein they have. A stack of data is shown about the chicken, and the information that it has 68 kilograms of protein is what catches his attention the most. He, who until then was neutral, looks at the chickens with a hungry look. His eyes gleam as he sticks out his tongue. With a leap, he goes after the chickens like a titan seeking his food. But he couldn't do anything. Now turned into a pile of bones, satisfying the protagonist's voracious hunger. But even after eating, something is bothering him. His arms are thinner than usual. His chest also seems smaller, and now he can even scratch his back, something he hadn't done since kindergarten. He refuses to believe that he lost his muscles, believing that effort wouldn't abandon him as he approaches a small lake in the middle of the forest. Observing his reflection, which is now that of a skinny young man with no muscles at all, he becomes desperate. All of his effort has been thrown away. He wonders where his muscles went as he screams near the lake. Immersed in deep depression, he wonders what's the use. All the effort he had doesn't matter anymore. He no longer cares where he came from. He approaches a tree, holding it with both hands. To stop being small, he'll have to go back to basics. He grabs the tree, digging his fingers into its trunk. Using all his strength, he pulls the tree from the ground, ripping out its roots. He hoists it onto his back and gets ready to start the exercise. The squat begins. His feet and legs feel like they're on fire with each squat. He thinks this time the effort won't betray him as he squats repeatedly. After a while, he increases the difficulty level by squatting and jumping, making so much noise that tremors are heard from afar. After 3 months of rigorous training, despite a significant evolution in his physique compared to before, not much has changed. At least he still has enough chickens to continue training and growing, but a giant rooster is watching over his shoulder. When Hansol looks back and faces this monster, he gets scared and runs for his life. As he desperately runs, he wonders what he did. He just wanted his muscles back, but the rooster continues to chase relentlessly. The rooster attacks him, but Hansol manages to narrowly dodge it. He realizes that if he gets hit, he'll die, but what's more dangerous about this chicken is the ridiculous size of its chest. He realizes he wasn't growing because he was weak, but because he only trained endurance. He forgot to train the small muscles, so his chest didn't develop as much. While fleeing from the rooster, he thinks he also wants to have a big, strong chest like it's when his path is obstructed by chickens. They look at him with malice in their eyes as if they know what they're doing. The rooster gets closer, almost catching him until his Hawkeye ability is activated. When he's fleeing and throwing the chickens up, the rooster's analysis ends. Hansol discovers it has 12,000 kilograms of protein, and because it has so much protein, if he eats the rooster's breast, the incredible muscle recovery skill will be added. With this information, he even stops running for a moment, quickly dodging the rooster's attack, now taking an offensive stance. Most people think muscles grow when they train, but it's not quite like that. Muscles actually grow during the rest time between workouts. As he quickly jumps from tree to tree, he prepares, looking at the giant rooster. Using all his strength and motivation to stop being small, he dodges the rooster's attack, which easily cuts part of the tree. He prepares to punch, risking his life. The rooster, with its neck resembling more of a snake, continues to advance towards him. All the muscles in his chest contract. A system notification saying he's using more energy than he can handle appears, but Hansol doesn't care about the system and continues with a fierce look in his attack. A unique ability awakens, causing his contracted arm to grow enormously all at once. The two continue their attack simultaneously. Hansol hits the rooster's open mouth, crushing and exploding its head immediately afterward. His ability is deactivated in mid-air. We see the rooster's body on the ground as Hansol falls beside it. By nightfall, he manages to cut and cook the rooster's meat, but he is observed from afar by creatures in the forest, unaware of the dangers that await him. The monsters, looking at him, drool with hungry looks on their faces. One of them tells the other to stop drooling, but it's somewhat inevitable since they haven't smelled meat in a long time. The monsters deduce that perhaps it was that human who defeated the giant rooster. As one of them approaches to ask, the other warns, saying he could be a dangerous monster. Hansol, eating his protein, sees the three little monsters with a submissive look. They introduce themselves as ghouls who live in the alien mine region. The protagonist uses his ability on them, seeing that they don't have much protein in their bodies. Anyway, he doesn't see humans as meat and becomes interested in these ghouls he's never heard of. The ghouls ask if he's the one who killed the giant rooster. Hansol answers affirmatively, making the small ghouls happy. They explain that since the most powerful monster died, a territorial battle between species has been happening in the alien mine. While the ghoul speaks, the protagonist analyzes his body. His legs and trunk are thin, making him wonder if they could break if he hit them. They continue explaining that the giant rooster, as dumb as it may be, is very sensitive when it comes to its territory, and they would like to ask a favor since he killed the giant rooster. Hansol, who didn't pay attention to anything they said, asks if they could repeat, but the ghouls warn that this is the 9th time they've said it. The protagonist tries to change the subject, saying they need to say it at least 10 times, stating that if you do something, you have to try it at least 10 times. The monsters, looking at him hopelessly, decide to leave since it seems he won't be able to help them. The protagonist says he's currently busy building his muscles, making the ghouls leave. To try to ease the situation, he says he won't be able to eat the whole chicken breast alone and wants to share it with them. The ghouls, who haven't eaten for a long time, accept his meat and thank him. One of the ghouls tries to lift that big piece of meat. Hansol, seeing that, realizes that if that ghoul tries to lift the chicken breast like that, surely its back would break. Immediately, he orders them to stop, asking if they knew how dangerous deadlifting is. Deadlift isn't called deadlift for nothing. If you lift it wrong, you could say goodbye to your back. The ghoul apologizes, asking what he did wrong, making the protagonist realize that perhaps they don't know what deadlift is. The confused monsters say it's the first time they've heard of it, making him understand why they're so thin. Hansol remembers something his personal trainer said when he was in elementary school, while they were doing lateral raises with an emphasis on the lower deltoid. His teacher said he could only truly learn something when he taught it to someone else, so if his muscles stopped growing, trying to teach others might help. While the ghouls are leaving with the chicken breast, Hansol lifts that huge, heavy piece of meat with just one hand and says that after sleeping he can go to their home since he needs plenty of rest for his muscles to grow. The next day in the ghoul village, which seems to be a very poor place located in a hole in the mountains, we see Hansol talking to the leader of the ghouls. He introduces himself as the Ghoul Lord, the one who rules the ghouls. Analyzing him, Hansol realizes that his arms and legs are thin without any muscle, whereas his trunk is full of fat, showing that he probably likes to drink and eat a lot of oily food. He thanks Hansol for the chicken breast he gave him and says he ordered the others to bring the rest of the meat. The protagonist comments that if it's them, it will take a while to arrive, making the Lord laugh at his concern for inferior beings. The protagonist, who doesn't quite like him, tells him to get straight to the point. The Lord says that he had some problems after he killed the giant rooster. As he can see, they're the weakest tribe in the alien mine, adding that their species is weak in physical combat and can't even use abilities, except him. Hansol remembers the system notification and asks what these abilities are, making the Lord question if he's serious. He gives a small laugh and orders them to bring the ghouls who brought him there. The protagonist, not understanding, sees the ghouls who brought him there entering tied up. They kneel before the Lord and ask why they were summoned. As he grabs a giant stick, he says that being loyal to a strong monster is the divine rule followed by them, and this is the punishment for those who lied to him. Preparing to attack with his stick, he activates an ability and hits the small ghouls who were there squarely. However, the attack is stopped by Hansol using just one hand. He asks what the Lord thinks he's doing wasting people's time like this, while calling him a bastard. The confused Lord thinks his ability wasn't active, or perhaps he didn't use his strength well. He explains to Hansol that his ability, strong and brutal, multiplies the weight of an object he touches from 2 to 10 times. Because of his mana, he can multiply the weight up to 9 times, impressing Hansol with his ability. The Lord prepares an attack monstrously, asking him what would happen if he multiplied the stick by 4 times and hit him with it, while the protagonist thinks about what would happen if he could add more weight without wasting time putting on weight plates. The Lord attacks with all his strength, But the moment the stick hits his body, it shatters into pieces. Hansol praises his abilities, saying it's incredible, even though it's a waste in his hands. He quickly approaches the Lord and, as if doing a front raise, grabs his neck, lifting him. He asks him if he thinks he can decide others' lives and what his big three are. Lord Ghoul doesn't quite understand what the big three are and thinks he wants to hit him 3 times. Hansol says they are the 3 main exercises: bench press, squat, and deadlift. The sum of the PR of these 3 exercises is known as a person's big three. Still holding the Lord by the neck, he realizes they don't know what that means and prefers to compete with the Lord to see who can lift more weight. Whoever wins this deadlift contest becomes the chief of the other. The Lord, still with his neck somewhat hurt, tells him to fulfill his promise, while Hansol tells him not to forget to maintain the correct posture to avoid injuring his back. But Lord has a plan to win. His ability not only increases the weight of objects, but can also decrease it. By decreasing the weight of the bar to a quarter, he easily lifts the 200 kilograms. The protagonist says he should use more glutes in the next movement and tells everyone to watch how he does it. Deadlift is a full-body exercise and can measure someone's strength. Most people think they use their backs to perform it, but in reality, the most important thing is the strength that comes from the lower parts. The protagonist stretches well, especially the hips, to avoid getting hurt. To start the deadlift, first, you have to position your feet below the bar. They have to be apart about shoulder width. Then you have to retract your scapula, opening your chest while keeping your spine straight. Then you apply force to your back, lower back, abs, and glutes, pulling the bar up close to your body. As he executes the movement, the Lord increases the weight of the bar 4-fold, causing the protagonist to use all his strength to throw the bar up. All the ghouls are amazed by this feat of strength. Hansol, who couldn't hold his strength properly, says they'll need another bar while he's greeted as the new leader of the ghouls. After losing the 3rd round, the Ghoul Lord started obeying him very well, explaining various things about this world. Surprisingly, this is a different place from where he came, and he thinks it's better not to try to go back now, since if he appeared skinny like this, they would call him Anchovy. This world has a strong concept that the weak obey the strong. That's how the Ghoul Lord promised loyalty so easily to him. He takes him to the training ground, the place he uses to train his warriors. Seeing their bodies, the protagonist expected it to be a terrible place, but it's even worse than he imagined. There's simply nothing there except for some scattered sticks. He asks what kind of training they have been doing, but the Lord says he has no knowledge about these things. The protagonist decides to let it slide. After all, first-class trainers make their own training machines, ordering the ghouls to gather. They seem to be somewhat reluctant and organize themselves haphazardly while the protagonist speaks. They are the weakest monsters. He asks them how long they will keep living off the scraps of other monsters, what they think it takes to be strong. Teamwork, opponent information, speed? No, all they need is a strong body to fight. In 3 months, they will transform into warriors strong enough to no longer fear other monsters. The ghouls, upon hearing that, are motivated by the idea of getting stronger. Hansol instructs them to assume a front-leaning rest position. Obviously, none of the ghouls know what that is and they are confused. Hansol assumes a push-up position while the ghouls try to imitate him. Since they've never done this before, all the positions are completely wrong. With fiery eyes, he announces that the warm-up will begin with 100 push-ups and the lined-up ghouls start exercising. 3 hours later, they are all exhausted, unable to even move their arms, while the protagonist continues steadily with his push-ups, which have already surpassed 20,000. The Ghoul Lord, who is using his ability to increase the weight of the stone on his back, draws attention, saying that none of them can continue the training. He says that after another 100 push-ups, they can go to lunch, making the ghouls, who have already done 700, completely desolate. They, unable to endure more training, say they preferred it when the Ghoul Lord was in charge and decide to stop the training, saying they've done enough. Hearing all the complaints, he orders everyone to stand up. The ghouls are happy to think it's over, but they are surprised by the protagonist's shouts. He says that it's because of this mentality that they were the weakest and asks if they are really okay with being called that. Living in a wild region where only the strongest survive, they don't have the strength to even protect those they love. Disappointed, Hansol tells those who think like that to leave, preferring not to train someone like that. Now those who stay will leave with big muscles and enough strength to protect everyone they love. Who is the best coach? The one who has reached the peak of his body with his knowledge? They may be good, but they don't produce the best result. Those who really produce results are those who can inspire even when their students don't want to train. The ghouls, who were previously unmotivated, return to doing push-ups, while Hansol inspires them to continue. Even suffering and crying, they don't give up training, hoping to become stronger. 3 months later, a group of lizardmen walk through the forest to the ghouls' village. Upon arriving, they plan to attack and take it for themselves. They begin the attack, expecting an easy victory over the ghouls. Meanwhile, Hansol, along with the Ghoul Lord, observes the arrival of the lizardmen. He instructs the bench press team to open their chests while inhaling, putting strength into their abdomens and squeezing their glutes. The approaching lizardmen are bombarded with large stones that crush them. Some ask what's happening, and Hansol replies, saying that the ghouls, who were known as the weakest, are not so weak now, showing that their bodies have evolved a lot in these 3 months. With the Rain of Stones, the leader of the lizardmen realizes that at this rate they will be annihilated, but if he can defeat the chief, things will change. Even sensing a strong mana power coming from Lord Ghoul, he is still just a ghoul and has no chance of winning. He tears his clothes while challenging the Ghoul Lord to hand-to-hand combat. He asks Hansol what to do in this situation. Thoughtful, Hansol remembers that when he was young and raised in Iguana, it was a rare species called a sea crocodile. The bite force of the crocodile was over 7,700 psi, which is equivalent to 2 tons. But even this powerful force was unable to penetrate Hansol's trained muscles. Angry at the bite, he wonders what to do if an animal doesn't obey, leaving the crocodile scared. He remembers what to do in these situations. He quickly jumps on the lizard man, who is still trying to convince the Ghoul Lord to fight. Hansol grabs him under his armpits and violently throws him to the ground. The impact is so strong that blood comes out of his mouth. After putting him on the ground with a threatening look on his face, he asks if they were trying to intimidate him. The lizardman screams for Hansol to let him go. He remembers that when he was younger, he heard somewhere that he should let animals know he is stronger, so he starts repeatedly saying that he is stronger, looking psychotically at the lizardman. He asks to be released but is afraid of the protagonist's gaze, giving up the battle, happy that the things he learned from reading books were actually useful. Everyone celebrates the victory against the lizardman. In a place not far from the alien mine in the Word of Duchy, a king greets young warriors, saying it is an honor to have them in the country, while using his shining sword to honor them. He orders them to investigate the disappearance of the giant rooster, and the warriors agree. After their departure, the king asks his knight if it was right to entrust such an important mission to children, but she assures him not to worry, as despite their young age, they are called geniuses. Leaper with his talent for the sword, subjugating opponents with his technique, and Hendard, who uses his overwhelming strength to deal with anything. These two together can only be stopped by a dragon. The king, impressed with them, asks about the third member. She says he is not as talented as the other two, and that she only sent him because the 3 of them have been friends since they were young. In a forest, they walk along a trail when they notice a goblin trying to shoot an arrow at them. Leaper quickly disappears, appearing behind the goblin, who, even when killed, shoots the arrow toward them. It passes in front of Blog's eyes, who warns that there are some hobgoblins among the goblins. Leaper argues with Hendard for not having protected Blog. He advised them, even though they started training at the same time, he is the only weak one of the 3. If there was any way to get stronger, he would surely seize that chance. Back in the ghoul village, the lizardmen say they can't take any more of the training. Hansol tells the ghouls that they have no choice, lifting the legs of the lizardmen and making them start the training again. After the training, the lizardmen are leaving. Hansol peacefully says that if they want to come back, they can. The lizardmen are a little apprehensive, while the ghouls make better side chests simultaneously, telling them to come back. The lizardmen, who haven't gotten used to it at all, leave with neutral expressions on their faces, but the group of ghouls continues in the poses. The protagonist says he was surprised when he first saw the buffed-up ghouls. Deload, when you exercise, your muscles get hurt and grow as they recover. However, accumulated fatigue in the central nervous system can cause injuries or decrease training intensity. To avoid this, it is necessary to rest from time to time. This is called deload. When the ghouls also entered the 9th week of training, they felt fatigued, so the protagonist thought about giving them a day off, but what surprised him was that the next day they woke up completely different. Overnight, their height and muscles grew larger, and using his Hawkeye ability, which is now level 2, the ghoul's name evolved to BODYBUILDER, and now shows their body fat percentage. Hansol calls them to go hunt for food, but the ghouls ask to go hunt alone today. At first, he thinks they are trying to skip training, but the truth is that they have never been able to defeat a chicken before. Now that they have trained for a long time, they want to be able to hunt their own food. BODYBUILDER says this while shaking his chest. The protagonist agrees because this way he can have more time to train, but ends up hearing the Ghoul Lord wonder if they could win. Hansol asks who they would be defeating, making the Lord defensive. In reality, he thought that if they united, they could be able to defeat the protagonist, but he asserts that he would never lose to anyone in deadlift, while gripping the Lord's shoulder. Meanwhile, in the forest, the ghouls are being forced to walk in lunges until one of them twists his ankle. He falls to the ground, groaning in pain. This was due to his joints not being developed enough for his body. He thinks that if there was someone there with powerful joints like his teachers, that would be motivation for the ghouls. He tells him to get up and continue. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the forest, Blog is training alone with a sword. His friends are upset for not having hunted, all because he is weak. He continues training while they sleep to at least reach their level, but at a certain moment, Leaper appears to help him in training. He asks if he woke him up while he was training, but Leaper says he wanted his friend to succeed, so he decided to ignore it. When he was secretly training at those hours of the night, while suspiciously caressing his face. He continues pinching his face, looking deep into his eyes, his face somewhat flushed, when they are interrupted by Hendard, who is leaning against a tree watching them. Blog tries to say they weren't doing anything, but is interrupted by Leaper. He argues with Hendard because he failed to protect Blog earlier. Hendard says it's late and they should sleep because Blog has to sleep at the right time for his skin regeneration to become active and softer. They continue arguing while Blog doesn't understand anything, wondering why they want to regulate his sleep schedule. Leaper says it's because they're friends. Blog notices lizardmen approaching and warns his companions, who prepare for combat. He takes a defensive position as they attack the lizardmen, but their leader orders them to keep running and ignore the humans. They are fleeing for their lives from a crowd of chickens. Meanwhile, the chickens are also fleeing for their lives from a crowd of ghouls after protein. Hansol didn't notice, but the food chain has changed drastically. Before this, Hansol was in the bush with the ghouls watching the chickens. He asks if they are sure they want to hunt them since their muscles are better. The frightened ghoul says they are definitely inflated muscles, making Hansol mad, wondering where he learned that. Watching a chicken passing between two trees, it gets stuck between them and forces its body, breaking the trees in half, reaching the worm it was looking for. Seeing this, one of the ghouls gets up and goes to two nearby trees. With a Chad look on his face, he puts his arms on the tree and flexes his muscles, but nothing happens. He says he'll try again after 1 minute of rest, but the protagonist tells him to rest for 3. He tries again, now following Hansol's tips. He places both hands on the trees and prepares to push. He uses all his strength, veins spreading throughout his body, but even with that, the trees don't budge. Even the protagonist finds it strange since even his fast twitch muscles were trained through various types of push-ups. Watching the chickens, he sees they are lined up, each one stuck to the other by the wing, exerting a lot of force. This makes the protagonist realize he didn't notice because the muscles were increasing little by little, and he discovers why they couldn't succeed. It's because they got used to the morning routine by repeating the same exercises so many times their bodies got used to it and stagnated. But there is a solution. He instructs them to form 5 lines and points to the tree behind him. Purple bands are attached to these trees. Hansol calls it a cable machine. Seeing this invention, the ghouls applaud him as he demonstrates how to use the device. From now on, they will make a cross with the cables to increase their chest size, so they can defeat the chickens. The ghouls get quite excited, saying that the Lord always has the answers to their problems. The protagonist tells him to calm down and demonstrates how they should perform the movement. This exercise stimulates the muscles within the chest, but it only becomes effective if you're doing the right movements, and it can be a bit challenging for beginners. Hansol begins to demonstrate the exercise while everyone there is watching. First, you must lean forward with one leg in front and the other behind. Second, you cannot fully extend your arms. And third, you have to stay in the center of the machine and push your chest a bit as if trying to fly like a bird. Depending on the angle of inclination, the affected part of the muscle is different, and for the training to be more efficient, you cannot use the force of the rebound, but rather stiffen the body and maintain posture. He says if they have any doubts, they can ask and spread several cables in the forest. The ghouls begin the training. Unlike the first time they trained their chests, they are now super excited to push themselves in training, leaving the protagonist super happy. After following the instructions, their chests became much larger, and the chickens watching the scene start to glow, evolving into a new form. Now with Papa and Cocktail, the protagonist finds it strange, realizing they got even bigger, while the ghouls, in a confident, go after the chickens. A battle ensues. The chickens advance on the ghouls, throwing them away with just one blow. The chickens got too excited and evolved into roosters. To stop their evolution, they need to prevent them from getting excited. Meanwhile, in the ghoul village, the ghoul lord is alone there, stretching happily that he's free. He likes Hansol, but his food isn't very much to his liking, so he decides to cook fried chicken. First, he gathers the ingredients and cuts the chicken skin into very short slices. Then he mixes everything together to make a magical powder and puts it in the food, then puts it in the oil, thus making fried chicken. Back in the forest, the ghouls are getting beaten by the chickens. They question why they can't beat them since they train hard. Some of them even despair, thinking there's something wrong with them. However, Hansol says they just started training now, while the chickens have a lifetime of effort, but it's not like there's no way to beat them. He remembers how they got there. Doing lunges, Hansol asks if they're tired. They pretend they're not, but the son says they know they're tired, and just because they've gotten a little stronger doesn't mean they're no longer weak. He himself in his past land squatted with 500 kilograms. The ghoul realizes that the source of his strength comes from his legs. Using them, they can fight against the chickens. Like an unstoppable beast, the ghoul charges at the chicken, but is hit and thrown up. The protagonist forgot that they already use all the strength in their legs to get there. The chickens look at Hansol standing there alone and decide to attack him all at once. However, with this simple hand movement, all the chickens' lives pass like a movie, and the next moment they are being cooked in a cauldron. Hansol tells them not to be discouraged and to try again tomorrow, while toasting for the muscle gain. The next day, Hansol talks about how far they are from surpassing him and tells them to go hunt the chickens, but to be careful not to get hurt. The ghouls ask if he won't go with them, but he says he'll only show up after training. After all, exercises are more important than any fight. He made a kind of improvised cable cross tied to 2 large rocks. The ghouls leave as he begins the training, but even with these 2 immense stones tied up, he feels so light that it's ridiculous, and he should have brought Gullard with him. Meanwhile, the ghouls are stretching. One of them says that to defeat the chickens, they will have to use their whole body, but if they evolve like yesterday, it will be dangerous. The ghoul with bones on his head asks if they should retreat if that happens even after all the exercises. The other replies that no, since the number of roosters Hansol caught was 27, they will try to catch 50, making all the other ghouls agree with the idea. The ghoul in a jacket tells them to split into 3 teams, and if something dangerous happens, they can signal with their pectoral muscles. The shaking of their pecs is so strong that it creates a certain vibration that the other ghouls can hear, so they prepare to advance on the roosters, running all at once. Meanwhile, where the protagonist killed the giant rooster, the 3 swordsmen observe the bones left there. One of them comments that the skull is missing, theorizing that it may have been hit by a high-class magical blow. Blog comments that a mage powerful enough to kill the giant rooster must be stronger than the great mage Adam, and he's not sure if he should be in charge of this mission, but his 2 companions say they won't let him get hurt. In this bro moment, they hear noises coming from the forest and quickly position themselves for combat. What emerges from the bushes are several chickens that are soon subdued by the ghouls. They see the humans. While they close in to protect Blog, the ghouls prefer not to advance since humans are violent and love killing. They are divided into 3 groups: the humans, the ghouls, and the chickens. The ghouls start bouncing their pecs, while the humans are confused, thinking it might be some performance before using an ability. They are actually calling teams 2 and 3 to gain a numerical advantage, but what they didn't know is that having their muscles develop so quickly would be both a blessing and a curse. The swinging of their pecs to call their allies not only sent a signal to them, but also provoked the roosters, who evolved from cocks to cocos, becoming stronger than a wyvern. The evolved roosters attack the ghouls, who realize they're in trouble. The leaders of teams 2 and 3 appear to help, so they prepare for combat. The roosters continue advancing incessantly towards them. One of the ghouls says he learned a secret technique from Hansol while preparing the move. He remembers that when he was doing bench press, he was almost crushed by the bar, but Hansol helped him. He says it's okay to ask for help occasionally to make the move. Only then will he be able to use all his strength. And then the ghouls position themselves organized to help the ghoul in front. They manage to hold the roosters' heads, putting all their strength to throw them away. But in a moment of carelessness, a stronger rooster advances on one of the ghouls. As if this were his last moment, he says goodbye to his companions, who scream desperately trying to help him. 3 milliseconds is the time to decide if someone is a good person or not. 486 seconds was the time it took for the 3 swordsmen to sympathize with the ghouls. Blog holds the ghoul from behind while his 2 companions go ahead to face the chickens. The swinging of their swords is so strong that they cut them in half, but even with this strength and working together, they are not enough to defeat the new enemy that appears. A much larger rooster, reminiscent of the rooster the protagonist killed, the ghouls are scared in front of the new enemy. Its large, rigid muscles and strength make this rooster comparable to a dragon. In the story, the first dragon had great power and craved fame. However, fearing that future dragons would surpass his position, he decided to divide his power, thus creating the Cockatrice race. Hendrik advances toward it, certain that eliminating this monster will be enough to gain his master's recognition. He leaps to strike its head, while his companion strikes from below. The protagonist, who is training, isn't very happy with his results, thinking he's still too slow. However, the quick progress of his students makes him very happy. They went from a bunch of crybabies, taught like babies to crawl, to becoming strong, healthy bodies. While he's thinking, one of the ghouls calls him. He warns him that the roosters have evolved and now everyone is in mortal danger. He prepares such a heavy squat that it breaks the rocks around him. He instructs them to point the way, using so much force in his legs that he tears his pants. They grow to an abyssal size as the ghoul watches in awe. With a furious look, he prepares the squat, being so strong that he leaps several kilometers high. The ghoul only sees his master disappear into the sky. Back in the fight, the 2 swordsmen are struggling to fight the giant rooster. They prepare a technique together. Hendrik prepares a secret technique where he throws sand up and tells Blog to run. Blog says he should have attacked instead of buying time, while his friend is attacked by the giant rooster. But even in the air, taking hits, he gives Hendrik a thumbs up, saying he did a good job. Blog tells them to stop caring about him and fight the rooster, happy that Blog is concerned about them. More giant roosters appear. Hendrik, while running, says they couldn't win even if they used their best move, and Blog, hopeless, says it's too late. The ghouls waiting for their masters did not give up the battle, forming a pyramid to stop the roosters. They are repeatedly attacked but remain firm, but not for long. Due to the strong attack of the rooster, the pyramid collapses, throwing them all over the place. Now really hopeless, they look at those giant roosters trying to attack them. But at the last second, something falls from the sky, killing the rooster instantly. The ghouls there think that Hansol has come to help, but when the smoke clears, it's actually their former lord. They wonder what the former lord is doing there. While the protagonist is shown landing far away, he realizes he took the wrong direction. The chickens surround the lord while several ghouls watch. The lord, with a serious look on his face, asks if this is all they can do. The humans realize that he must be the ghoul lord since he is stronger than the others. The ghouls nearby say that he is their leader, While the chickens look at him confused. When they realize he is an enemy, they all gather around him. He comments that he didn't come there without a plan. The ghouls watching this scene are embarrassed by their lord, while he, realizing that Hansol won't come, starts to fear the roosters. 6 hours earlier in the ghoul village, the lord leaves his cabin stretching, wondering why they are taking so long with the hunts, since he's hungry. As the food ran out, he thinks maybe he should go fetch them. As the giant rooster is dead, there shouldn't be any danger there. Arriving in the forest, he hears his subordinates' screams and thinks that only he and Hansol can bully them, so in anger, he grabs a nearby giant rock. Even with Hansol's arrival, the lord did not lose his position as one of the leaders, and the reason for this was not because the builders were weaker than him, or because the law of the jungle had changed. The lord, who had no choice but to use his ability to increase Hansol's weights, pushed himself to the limit, reaching the maximum level of the skill. It decreases the weight of the rock by 1/10 and throws it towards the roosters. When it reaches the perfect position, he increases the weight by 10 times, causing the impact from earlier. Now the lord is hopeless of winning, but one of the ghouls comments that he managed to kill a rooster with just one attack. Maybe he had become stronger than Hansol. These words make him reflective, as it is indeed difficult to defeat monsters in just one attack. Perhaps he is stronger because he is different from ordinary ghouls. However, he is hit by the rooster and thrown away, making the ghouls really hopeless. Blog speaks what seems to be his final words to his friends and prepares to die fighting. The ghouls, still flexing their chests, say they will use their last muscle cells to fight. They advance towards the roosters. Although their training has been difficult, they were able to glimpse what it's like to be strong. The 3 swordsmen also prepare to attack. That horde of giant roosters looks down on them as they keep advancing towards them. Far away in the forest, where the lord had been thrown earlier, it's Hansol. The lord tells him to save his subordinates as he slowly loses his life. His calm ability begins to activate several times, trying to calm him down. The sound of his chest was able to attract the attention of the roosters, who ignored the ghouls and went to him. All the roosters are circling him, while he tells the system to stop trying to calm him down, saying he's already quite calm now. The ghouls run into the forest, while the humans follow them. Log carries his incapacitated companion, who seems quite embarrassed to be carried by him. The ghouls say they're feeling the vibration of Hansol's chest. Log asks who he is, but the ghouls can't explain properly. The chickens look at him threateningly and try to attack him, but with a swift slap, he sinks the belly of the chicken, throwing upwards. The others, seeing this, attack him together. They jump in the air, crossing their legs, attacking Hansol at the same time. He manages to hold their legs even while sunk in the ground. Using the exercise movement, he pushes the chickens upwards, but is trampled many times by the others around. He goes after one of them, delivering a flying kick to its head. The others are scared by the quick death of their friend. He remembers that his ancestors said that you can gauge your muscle development based on the vibrations of your chest. He says that only with his chest can he develop the chickens and asks if they could do the same for him. With a look of anger on his face, Hansol attacks them using all his strength in his upper body, growing his torso and arms. He continues to attack and kill the chickens in various ways. The humans who arrive there are impressed with his strength. He is so fast that they can't even see his movements while the chickens fear him. He, who used much of his leg to get there, doesn't have much strength left in them. However, if he gives up, he won't be able to avenge the former lord who helped him so much in his training. Using the bench press motion, he swells the upper part of his body again, but due to his lower parts being weak, he can't get past the horde of roosters. When all seems lost, he feels several hands on his back helping him. Both humans and ghouls work together to face the roosters, finally defeating them. Lying on the ground, Hansol says he'll miss the ghoul lord. The other ghouls say he was quite violent before Hansol arrived, but over time, he became a nice guy. The protagonist, who is beat up, asks who will help him up, but the other ghouls turn away and pretend not to hear. While he's arguing with them, the ghoul lord appears, thanking him for his work, leaving the protagonist and the other ghouls confused. He says he ended up taking a nap after the beating, while everyone jumps for joy on top of him. Meanwhile, in the county, the swordsman explained to the king that it was the protagonist, leader of the ghouls, who killed the rooster. He thinks that the ghoul lord is not such a big threat, but Hansol can definitely show his fangs and attack him. The master swordsman asks where Blog is, and they answer, crying as they remember what happened. Hansol was examining Blog's body, and even though they were injured, they tried to stop him. Hansol says his posture is good and asks if he has any ideas on how to get stronger while being attacked by the two. With bare hands, he holds the two swords while continuing to insist that Blog exercise with him. They cry and say they had no choice but to leave him and ask their master to save him from that monster. The king says there is not enough information, and what may be being taught is black magic, so he cannot risk it without absolute certainty. He also says it's not as if their master would act recklessly, but as if defying the king's orders, she says she'll go get him while seething with anger. The king asks why she's being emotional, while she shouts for her students to prepare quickly. She says they crossed the line by touching one of her students and advances with the two to save him. In the ghoul village, Hansol says they now have a newcomer and will start the squat training. Log asks what a squat is, and Hansol promptly explains it. The squat is the best exercise to stabilize the body, and thigh muscles are used for that. He demonstrates how to do the movement, but Blog can't repeat it since he's a beginner. Instead of squatting, he simply squats down. To correct his movement, he tells him to open his legs to shoulder width, point the knee to the tip of the foot, and move the hips as if sitting in a chair. Doing this, he manages to execute the squat perfectly, being praised by Hansol, who says he did very well for the first time. He tells him to raise his arms while lifting the weight off the ground. He releases the weight on his back, almost crushing him. Blog uses all of his strength to lift the weight. The ghouls watch him applaud his strength, while the protagonist is impressed that he managed to squat with a heavy bar while maintaining his posture. His eyes weren't wrong, and this guy is a powerlifter. He asks if Blog followed him to get stronger. He says yes, that he wants to be strong like his friends, but the protagonist fears he may not be as strong as his friends, leaving Blog a little sad. He says he already knew he wasn't a genius, but still grateful that he can get at least a little stronger thanks to Hansol. He interrupts him, saying he won't be as strong as his friends, but stronger than them, saying he has a rare talent, making Blog cry. After all, this is the first time he has been recognized by others. The next day, Hansol appears with some chicks. He says it's okay to hunt them, but if they continue like this, they'll end up extincting the species, so to avoid that, they'll take care of and breed their offspring. The Lord says they are species that grow very fast and that there aren't many monsters capable of defeating them. For now, they are weak as they are babies, but when they grow up and evolve, it will be difficult to defeat them. Hansol asks if he can beat them. He is a little hesitant, saying that if they tried, maybe they could. Hansol tells him not to underestimate his species since they are strong now. In the trading field, they started doing squats again. As the weight is very light for him, he does unilateral squats to make it heavier. Blog is preparing like a true powerlifter. He applies magnesium to his hands while the Lord increases his weights. He asks if he's ready, and Blog firmly responds yes. The Lord doubles the weight, causing Blog to use all his strength to lift it. He exerts so much force that a little blood comes out of his forehead. The protagonist watches from afar as many ghouls struggle to squat. While they are training, someone uses an ability that flies toward the protagonist. It generates such a strong impact that it causes an explosion, throwing everyone away and injuring them a little. The Master Swordswoman arrives at the Ghoul Lord, asking if he kidnapped her student, but he quickly explains that there is a misunderstanding as he is not the boss. The Master Swordswoman says he should have answered only yes or no while attacking with her sword. The impact is so great that it generates another explosion, but it is stopped by the protagonist using his arm. He says he is doing nothing but exercising and asks what the problem is. She is impressed that he managed to stop her sword with his body, while he is worried that she may have hurt his muscles a bit. She quickly sheathes her sword while asking her students if he is the target. They shout from behind that they are there to save Blog and ask him to come back with them. She apologizes for interrupting the training and says it's not cool to steal other people's students. Hansol asks Blog if he already had a trainer, leaving him somewhat confused about what to say. However, Hansol asks if he thinks exercises are better than fencing, and agreeing, he apologizes to his master and says he prefers to stay there doing exercises. She seems to accept this situation peacefully, but the next moment draws her sword, saying she'll have to take him by force. She attacks Hansol again, who defends himself by making the best chess pose. With her pride hurt, she only managed to scratch him and asks Blog if he wants to leave his body like this. She proposes a duel. The winner has the right to take him, as it would prove that the winner had the best martial arts. But Hansol explains that bodybuilding is not a martial art, it is training to develop muscles. She says she heard he killed the giant rooster and thought he used exercise technique to do it, but he explains it was just to get protein. She says this exercise thing is useless in combat, leaving the protagonist angry. She continues to irritate him, asking what's the point of training the body if you can't fight, and calls him trash. Hearing these words, he can't hold back his anger and assumes a different form from his original, saying he will show what exercises are for. A ghoul watching the fight wonders who will win. Another warns him to look at their sizes, but Blog says they couldn't judge just by physical appearance since his master is one of the 10 strongest people on the continent. Hansol activates his ability and sees the woman's bodily attributes, wondering how she managed to injure his body even with so little muscle mass. She calls him a half-demon, asking what kind of training he teaches, and says her fencing is a martial art that can cut her enemies into pieces. She attacks several times, even impressing Hansol with her strength. She continues to pressure him with various attacks, even in his new form. Hansol can't do anything. She stops for a second and comments that even though his appearance is human, she still called him a half-demon. Impatient, Hansol tries to attack her, but she quickly dodges and counterattacks. She continues to say that the mana circulating in his body is red, and the redder it is, the closer to becoming a demon you are. While attacking, she says there is no technique that can alter the bodies of humans. Her attack is so strong that it creates a crater around, but Hansol manages to dodge. She says humans use strength and mana to fight while a ray shoots into his body. She activates an ability, creating several swords around Hansol, all attacking at the same time and defeating him. She says that for humans, training the body is useless, and that these exercises are garbage. Hansol questions her if her opponents are fixed and that bodybuilding evolves every day, making you stronger. She launches a rain of attacks which are stopped by a front double biceps. He continues saying that people who train in the gym always get stronger. His whole body begins to grow exponentially as he stares at the master swordswoman. Leaper and Hender talk to Blog, apologizing for resorting to the master. They just wanted him to come back. Blog says he's actually there just to train. After training, he'll go back to the city, leaving them pleased with that. They say they would also like to learn this martial art. Blog says he doesn't know very well since he just started, but he'll try to teach them. He asks if they still remember what's most important when you start learning fencing. Leaper replies that it's the lower body's limbs, and Blog continues explaining. The exercise they're going to do now uses the quadriceps and is called squatting. He puts a weight on the bar, which makes the Lord apprehensive since they're just starting, but soon says he'll be there to support them. While Hansol and the Master are fighting, she asks why he hid his strength until now, but he replies he wasn't hiding, he was just gathering it. She hears Leaper groaning, and when she looks, she sees them shirtless training, blushing and asking what that training was. Hansol, still in his Beast Titan form, says it's squatting and drooling. The Master says she wants to include this training program in theirs. Hansol automatically exits the Titan form, asking her what she saw in the training. She mentions she saw the sticky passion and that she could peek at the happiness of those sweaty men. This woman is just a pervert. Then the two hold hands united by physical exercise. As she's leaving on horseback, Hansol notices that her forearm muscles are well developed. He asks what kind of exercise she does for them, but she replies that the only thing she does is swing the sword. She asks if it's okay to teach her training method without receiving anything in return, but he replies that the more people know how to exercise, the better, as this way, more training methods will be researched and created. He uses bodybuilding, Pilates, CrossFit, and rehabilitation, for example. He would like the culture of exercising to spread all over the world if possible. She finds him a bit funny and says if he needs anything, he can ask, and she'll try her best to help. While they camp at night, Blog comes to talk to Hansol. He says that where he lives, there's a lot of discrimination, not only against other species, but also against magic and disbelief. They only treat humans well, especially swordsmen. He says this because he's worried about the ghouls, while the protagonist says it's a serious problem. However, the serious problem he was talking about was the horse's food. He gets up and eats it, recognizing by the rough, rigid texture that it was the vein. He can't believe that such a large source of carbohydrates is being eaten by horses and continues eating, even scaring the horses. The soldiers there look and find it disgusting, saying he must be an uncivilized child. They say that even when it comes to food, monsters have low standards. However, they are surprised by the ghoul lord who, to defend the monster's honor, offers them some of his food made using theirs. The beautiful dish smells so good that it makes the men disbelieve that this was their food. They taste a bit, getting infected by the flavor. The Lord says that if one day they get close, he can teach them the recipe and not to speak nonsense about monsters anymore. Meanwhile, Hansol goes to talk to Ryan, the master swordswoman. He remembers the favor she said she would do for him while showing oats in his hands. He would like to obtain these harvests. Ryan says she heard from Blob that he liked agriculture and asks if it's to feed the horses. He promptly responds that it's actually for them to eat, leaving everyone confused and disgusted by that. She says it's not a problem, but she feels a bit sorry for feeding them with animal feed. Even her companions say they seem to have a high status among humans, and she thinks it would be a waste to use that to get animal feed. Hansol looks disgusted at them, asking what they had just said. Ryan says they're right and that he could ask for better things like clothing sets, armor, or houses. The ghoul says that chicken breasts are enough as food and questions why they would need animal feed. But all this only makes the protagonist irritated. He explains that if they consume only proteins, it will harm the liver's health. If they consume the right amount of carbohydrates, they will receive a glycogen buildup, increasing their strength during training. Oats are the best for this since their digestion rate is slow, making them feel full for longer. Besides, they have low calories and high nutrient content, and he asks again if there's any favor better than asking for oats. The ghouls feel ashamed of their lack of knowledge and are excited about the idea of gaining more strength and muscle mass. The knights think this could be a way to get stronger to defeat General Ryan, and they don't plan to let monsters beat them, deciding to try oats too. Even the two swordsmen decide to try when they see Blog eating. They all start eating the horse feed, but they all vomit right after. The oats are disgusting. The blonde tells Blog to stop eating, but he says it has a firm and pleasant texture and finds it tasty, leaving the protagonist impressed that he also has a talent for eating. Ryan says she didn't quite understand, but since he wants it, she'll find a way to get it, leaving Hansol very excited, while his soldiers and ghouls vomit. Back at the castle, they signal that the general has returned as they pass through the bridge. The large gate opens and they walk through the city. The ghouls notice the strange looks from people, while Blog confirms what he had said before to him. This country is full of the most discriminatory people on the continent. As they walk, people throw them looks of disgust and contempt. The ghouls, who begin to succumb to the pressure of the looks, are corrected by the protagonist, telling them to maintain their posture. He says those people are looking because they have beautiful bodies, making the ghouls more comfortable. They prepare and start making various poses, displaying their bodies to the audience as they walk to the castle. People even wonder why they were enjoying it. Back at the castle, they speak with the king. He asks if they're really leaving after teaching what a workout is. The protagonist nods yes. He also confirms if the reward they want is the cattle feed, but the protagonist replies that it's not just animal feed but oats, leaving the king annoyed with the response. He continues saying that if it weren't for the general, he would have turned them into hedgehogs already. The general thanks him for his kindness, but the king shouts not to cause any trouble. Hansol agrees and says that if he wants to come after work, he can also teach him. Seeing them leave, the king seems unhappy with the situation. As the king of a prejudiced nation, he is also prejudiced. He was worried about the general, who is getting along very well with the commoners, but he sees it as an opportunity to undermine her. He orders them to call the titular mercenary, thinking of using him against her. Back at the training ground, the knights are learning fencing. Their training is interrupted by their coach, who introduces Hansol as a special teacher recommended by General Ryan. The training knights are confused by his appearance, as it doesn't match that of the ghoul lord, and they wonder why a monster should teach them. Their coach continues saying that this is an order given by their general, and anyone who disobeys would be breaking the law. Hansol introduces himself, saying he will show them his training routine, instructing everyone to lie face down. The students, not understanding, look to Blah, while the protagonist shouts at them to lie down immediately. The ghouls follow his movements, clumsily lying down on the ground. One of the students refuses to lie down, asking why they should listen to a mere monster. Their instructor again says that this is an order from the general and they should obey as if they were hearing it from her directly, but the student refuses, asking if he really agrees with this. The protagonist starts to get a little annoyed as he continues to try to convince his classmates not to obey the monsters. The protagonist stands up, asking what the problem is. The student replies, saying he won't follow the order of a monster. This training, which he calls exercise, is useless for a swordsman, and he doesn't need to use uncivilized methods from inferior races drawing his sword. The Lord tries to resolve the situation through conversation, preventing the protagonist from doing anything more violent. He says that so they won't have to obey a monster, Blah can teach them. Since they don't know which training method is the best, they can have a battle between a human and a monster to decide this. Losing patience, he says that in the end they will determine if is uncivilized or not after seeing the result of the simulated training. As they flex their muscles, the ghouls say they are ready, making Hansol proud. The man who was against them accepts the proposal and volunteers for the combat. One of the ghouls approaches. The man with a sinister look reveals himself as the titular mercenary hired by the king. His level of swordsmanship is much more advanced than the students. He advances to attack the ghoul, but is stopped by him using only one of his arms. The blood of his face is so strong that it leaves a large lump, worrying the protagonist if he is okay. He scolds the ghoul who did this, telling him not to boast like that, while the man is unconscious in the corner being helped by one of the recruits. The protagonist turns to them, saying that now that they have lost, they have to obey him. The recruits, seeing the display of strength, agree with him. However, the mercenary activates a combat ability. A blue aura starts emanating from his body as he advances to attack the ghoul. But before he can hit him, he is stopped by the Lord, who uses an ability in his boots to incapacitate him. The protagonist quickly advances on him, violently throwing him against the wall. Compared to before, the impact this time is so strong that it fixes him there. General Ryan arrives at the training ground and sees her recruits discussing that someone used magic. The people there are also prejudiced against the use of magic and look disgusted at the monsters. She instructs the instructor to explain the situation. He says there was a battle because some of her students did not follow her orders. Her soldiers lost, but if they're saying the monsters must have used some magic. She asks Hansol if this is true, but he denies it. The general then confirms that they did not use magic. Suddenly, the king appears, asking if she believes these monsters, questioning if she's on their side or the monsters. She obviously says she's on the side of the people, but her actions are questioned by the king. The protagonist, who doesn't quite understand the situation, thinks the king came to exercise, but he is stopped by the Lord, who explains what is happening. The king says he greatly esteems the general, but the guests she brought are causing problems for the people. Even one of her supposed students got hurt. As a way to punish her for her actions, he exiles her from the duchy for 2 years. The general is not pleased with this information, and her gaze intimidates the king. Even with the general's action, her students say that this cannot happen and ask him to lift the exile. The general apologizes to Hansol for not taking care of them properly, but she is easily forgiven by the protagonist, who says that things don't always happen the way we want. She still asks the king to keep the promise of letting them stay there for 3 months. Thinking the preparation is over, she scolds her soldiers who dared to disobey the king. She thought they would only discriminate against monsters, but now they have the courage to respond to their superiors. For new changes to occur, she must step back so that new seeds can sprout. She's curious to see how the protagonist will change them, and when she returns, it will be fun. Probably she just wants to see her soldiers turning into muscular, handsome men. At night, the hired mercenary leaves the castle with a bag of money. Talking to himself, he says that if he can do a few more dirty jobs, he can open a flower shop for his daughter, looking at the photo of his family on his watch. However, the same photo is shown in his house, now in flames. The whole village is on fire as zombie monsters approach. Watching all this from the top of a mountain, a thin man with blue hair laughs at the situation. He says his hometown is welcoming them so beautifully, while his companions behind him remain silent. He asks the woman in his group to dance, calling her princess, and they start dancing to the melody of the flames. The next day, as they leave the castle, her students bid farewell to their mistress. Curiously, she asks what Blog is doing there. He replies that there is no training today. He asks permission to accompany her, and Hansol said it wouldn't be a problem. She then invites him to go to that place, but Blog questions what would happen if the king found out. She reassures him that it's okay, complimenting his voice for being stronger. She even says she would let him marry her if he became a little braver, but he ends up saying that she must be like 60 years old, ending up having to flee with his friends, holding her back from killing him. In the middle of the forest, a slime passing by is quickly captured by a ghoul. It seems they are hunting slimes because Hansol is going to teach a new exercise. They end up meeting Blog and the commander, who asks what they are doing. They say that Hansol said they needed the slimes, but when she asks for what, they tell her to see for herself. She questions if he didn't tell them what they were going to do, but Blog explains that ghouls are not very good at explaining things. Arriving where they are, Blog greets Hansol, who says they can do some lunges while walking. Ryan says she came by because she was curious about what he was doing. Meanwhile, the ghouls corner the slimes. Hansol noticed during the students' training that weightlifting alone would not be effective for them, so to make a more athletic training, he is improvising some equipment. She asks if he is trying to make a slime dummy to slice, but he replies that it's a bit different from fencing. With the slime in front of him, he says the first thing to do is to remove the ball inside them since it's like their heart. It will regenerate after a few days. Then he makes a hole in the middle of the slime and starts stretching it in all directions. Thanks to its excellent elasticity and contraction, by doing this he can create a resistance band. He explains that it can be used in various ways such as rehabilitation exercises, warm-ups, and many others. Ryan thanks him and apologizes to him. At first she was suspicious, thinking he was pretending to like training to get closer to humans. She considers herself a failed teacher since she couldn't stop the duchy from becoming a discriminatory nation. She finds him different. Perhaps he is capable of bringing changes to this country. He says he understands change by showing physique, but it wasn't that kind of change she was referring to. Throwing his cape back, she reveals a group of recruits. The students who saw the demonstration of his strength want to hear what he has to say and train with him. Ryan asks Hansol to take care of her children for now while she's away. He eagerly agrees, happy with the acquisition of new members. Meanwhile, changes are not only happening around Hansol. The king is on his white horse leading an army. He arrives in the burning city, warning that the enemy is undead called zombies, explaining that it's best to be careful with them since if you get bitten, you become one. Then he leads his knights advance. They face the horde of zombies in the burning village while the three people who caused this watch from atop the mountain. They comment that they can't advance now since Ryan could appear. The dog begins to circle him and bark, irritating this man who kicks it, calling it a stupid dog. The dog gets up and he says to wait just a little longer since these zombies are just toys. Back to group training, Hansol says there's a limit of endurance in the body that a person can use, which is why you train the muscles you need. His trainer tells him to stretch well and start with bench presses, but he is interrupted by Hansol, who says they'll do CrossFit today. He asks what CrossFit is, and Hansol explains. CrossFit is a training method created by Greg Glassman. It's a continuous method of high-intensity training that uses various parts of the body simultaneously. It also helps with teamwork by using competitive training methods, which is perfect for them, since they haven't gotten used to their teammates yet. He has already made the list for each group, so if they have any doubts, they just have to ask the Lord. The training begins, and simultaneously the war against the zombies also does. While they train, the soldiers fight against the zombies with deaths on all sides. The protagonist hears a siren and asks the coach what it means. He explains that since the king is fighting zombies near the castle, this siren means he needs reinforcement. But as he's talking, Hansol argues with the fourth group that is doing it wrong, making the coach realize that he really doesn't care. Meanwhile, the king congratulates the soldiers and says that according to the investigations, they managed to find out where the enemy's base is. They will invade it, annihilating everyone and protecting their country. He again orders his soldiers to march against the zombies. His general comments that he is worried they are going too deep into the horde, but the king insists that the soldiers are doing well. However, deeper in the forest, the man with blue hair calls his companions, ordering them to attack the soldiers. He says there is something they didn't quite understand in war. It's better to use spears since swords only serve to increase their capabilities. His companions begin to slaughter the opponents. However, the king appears attacking him, but he easily defends himself. He says the king has aged, while the king asks how he maintained the same appearance. Unlike the general, he wasn't as proficient in using his energy to maintain his youth, but taking needles out of his pocket, he says he did some experiments. Sticking himself with a needle, his body starts to grow. The king is scared seeing a monster appear in front of him and asks if he experimented on humans. I'll bring part 2 soon if you guys like it, so let me know if you enjoyed it. Comment down below. See you next time. Bye-bye.